Hello and welcome. My name is Sara Cochran. I am Chief Curator. Welcome to the church. And I'd like to thank you for my birthday serenade. That has never happened before. And I would like to thank the three artists who are up here with me today. These are the last 4 days of Empire of Water at the church. It has been a really wonderful exhibition. I'd like to thank you for being here tonight. It's been very popular, and as we like to explain, it doesn't matter what we do if the audience doesn't show up. So thank you so much for being here and joining us. We have a couple more programs. We're going to have April talking in front of her piece, which we're very excited about. Unfortunately, John Alexander is unwell, and so we are postponing his talk, but we will do that later in the season. And we also have a wonderful concert on Saturday night. So we do want to monopolize as much as we can of your holiday weekend. So with that, I would like to formally welcome the gentlemen who are up here with me. And I'm particularly excited about this panel because I think that we have here with us tonight a really interesting group of artists who are deeply committed to their art, but also have interest in science, specifically in this region, and also in ecology. And so I think this is going to be a really interesting and really relevant conversation for where we are. They need no introduction, but just because they're here, I will give it. Scott Bluedorn is sitting next to me, an artist, illustrator, and designer, works in many, many different media. One thing I'm looking forward to talking more to Scott about tonight is his stated desire to develop maritime cosmology that sort of comes out of the collective unconscious. And I think we all sort of understand what that is in general, but we look forward to talking about that more in particular. Scott is also just back from Miami, where he was involved in a residency that was focused on ecology. So this will add greatly to the conversation. And Scott grew up here and is a native son. So Scott, thank you so much for being with us tonight. Next to Scott, of course, is Steve Miller. Again, somebody who needs no introduction, an interdisciplinary artist and designer who uses environmental sorry, wrong one. Sorry, Steve. Steve is a multimedia artist and someone who is also a designer working across the visual arts in painting, sculpture, printing, as well as artist books. Steve has long been interested in science, has gone to Brazil a number of times. Brazil has really been where his interest in science and perhaps in some of the commercial activities that Steve has been involved in around surfing and around fashion have sort of intersected. And I think that's a really interesting place to sort of embed this conversation with Steve. Steve has worked with scientists from around the country and the world, including CERN, but also the Rockefeller University, among many, many others. Steve has been working with computers and art since the 1980s, and more recently actually developed a platform for the art world. So again, somebody who really stands with feet in both of these worlds. Steve lives here and has done so for a long time. And Cy Keener over at the far end, who is the interdisciplinary artist and designer with a background in architecture. Somebody who has used environmental data in order to kind of record and represent the natural world through art. Somebody who has been extensively traveling in the Arctic of late. Someone who also has a practice collaborating with scientists. And who has spent time out here with his wife, Bree, who is in the audience, and their son Wyatt. He has built a house out here. And so this is just, I think, the depth of where we can go with this conversation, and that is really the reason I was terribly excited and very grateful that the three of you would join us tonight. So I thought perhaps just to launch us for the beginning of the evening, it might be interesting for each one of you just to talk briefly about the piece that you have in the exhibition. Scott has two pieces. And to talk perhaps about how that fits into your larger career as an artist and perhaps your interest in science. I don't know who would like to start. Scott, you have your in hand, so let's start with you.
Okay. Okay, well, thank you very much for having me here, and I'm very honored to be in this exhibition that is about really one of the focus of my artistic world and work, and also just my kind of everyday life, which is water, and specifically the ocean. It's kind of my never-ending source of inspiration, and how I've created my own life is around the ocean, and that's through surfing and beachcombing and just being near large bodies of water, and realizing that it has this amazing magnetic pull for so many people, and especially artists, and I think that's why people come here. And that is certainly, I was lucky enough to be born here and still living here, and I really don't take that for granted. And so my work really comes from that deep wellspring of the ocean and ecology, and how how all these things are related to the larger natural world. My work in this show is particularly about like you said, a maritime cosmology, which, how do I define that? It's kind of a narrative-based idea of through drawing and through painting, but not just those things, but also mixed media. I work with assemblage and printmaking and many different artistic forms, and I'm kind of grasping at what the ocean's supernatural and natural qualities, and how they've affected mankind, and how they've created our history, our culture, how we relate to one another, and even consciousness itself. And I think these things float through, they kind of connect this magical thread through our lives, and in ways that I think not even every person understands. I think people who've never been and seen the ocean are still affected by it. It drives global climate, it drives all of these natural systems that are now, for better or worse, shaping our world, even if we're not directly close to the ocean. So the two pieces in this show include they're both I'm working on found objects, which to me are very interesting because they're coming from my beachcombing kind of practice, which really is part of my artwork, and finding these cast-offs of an industrial society, which we all live amongst, and how these things are shaped and transformed by the natural forces of the ocean and then cast up on shore. And so for me, it's kind of a collaboration in finding that work and then meeting it halfway and doing my drawing or my painting. So these two pieces kind of both relate to personal experience that I've had through traveling, whether it's just in our backyard in Montauk, where there's a depiction of a snowy owl on a wrecked staircase that's falling into the water, which in and of itself is a symbol of storms and erosion and climate-driven action that the ocean is always consistently delivering. And the fact that snowy owls are in and of themselves these magical kind of creatures. So that was a real experience that I had. And I do work a little bit from photographs, but also just from like kind of intuition and memory. And the other piece is actually I took a trip to Iceland, and then I was looking around the coastline, which is always kind of where I'm attracted to, and I found this large shipwreck, and there was all these sheep around, and then it was also a very strange kind of magical area, which was known for witchcraft, as a matter of fact, and Icelandic witchcraft as a special brand of witchcraft or sorcery is just that much more fascinating. And I learned that some of these wizards, Icelandic wizards, had created spells to ward off, either to create storms or ward off storms. And I like to imagine that this particular sorcerer, maybe contemporary or not, might have driven this ship onto the beach. And again, it's this mystery of the ocean and what brings us to confront these things about ourselves that I think that's very interesting.
Okay, looks like we're going down the line. Thank you, Scott, and thank you, Sara and Eric, for this incredible exhibition. And I'm really a big fan of the church because I love this idea of community and the kind of conversations that take place here. Political conversations, local conversations, conversations about culture, music. So, being a part of this, it's really an honor. And the work that you guys have done is mind-blowing, as demonstrated by this elevator right behind us, which is a work of art in itself. Big topic, water, and I guess I'll focus on my piece and how it started. So I was invited to Brazil to be in an exhibition, and there were a lot of artists in this show, and we all went down for the opening. It was really crazy, and it was fun. It was created by Nessia Pope, known as Nessia Leonzini in Brazil, and a lot of us went down, including, I'm trying to think who's shown here. I can't remember who was on. David Sally was on that trip. Ralph Gibson was on that trip. Clifford Ross was on that trip. Okay, so that's three right there. They've all been involved with this place. And when I went to Brazil, I was just blown away by the natural beauty and the way the environment interacts and the way the people interact with the environment in positive ways and negative ways. And there's this very big fruit called a jackfruit. It's called a jaca. And it's huge, and they're high up in the trees. And I thought, if this thing fell on your head, it would really knock you out. And then I thought, it looks a little bit like a set of lungs. And I ended up thinking, okay, I really want to spend time in Brazil. I'm a kind of a workaholic guy. If I don't have a project, I can't hang out. And I was thinking, well, if the Amazon are the lungs of the planet, I could x-ray the lungs of the planet and give Brazil a theoretical medical checkup. So that was my project, a 10-year project, a decade-long project to x-ray the Amazon. And it's called Health of the Planet, for which I have the trademark in the US and also in Brazil. It's Saúde do Planeta. So I got those two trademarks, and I turned this into a project. So one of the things we did was I went to the Amazon, this town called Belém, and we had to find the animals. I'd already done the plants in Sao Paulo. There's a massive market, just miles that big, and it's probably 5 square miles of watermelons, flowers, you name it. It's just huge because Sao Paulo's 20+ million people. So this is the food source and the flower source. I went with a botanist. We went to the market. We chose the Amazon plants. I found a hospital that was willing to let me x-ray the plants. I found a art collector who had a solarium that let me keep all the plants. And every night I would go to this hospital at 5 o'clock, take whatever we thought we could do that night, x-ray them. I had some incredible people helping me, and we worked late in the night. I had this car and driver. I drove everybody home because the subway system stops. I went all over the outskirts and the favelas of Faville, which is where the hospital workers were working. Took everyone home. I got home at 4 in the morning. It was crazy, but it was so much fun. And the next problem was, okay, where do I get the animals? And there was this town in Belém, which had the oldest kind of collection of museums and animals. There was a museum, a zoo, an aviary, an aquarium, all in this one town. And it was a question of okay, how does one get access here? So one of the collectors who had the solarium, Kim Estevi, if anybody knows Kim, he used to live in Georgia. And Kim knew the ex-governor of Pará, which is the state where this town is located. And I wrote a letter to a friend of his who was had an X-ray, huge complex there. And in typical Brazil fashion, and this is not a disparaging remark around anyone here that's Brazilian if they are, but I sent one email, he said yes. I sent 10 more, which he never responded to, and that's like super, so I just gave up. So another collector of mine in Brazil had bought a piece of mine of a x-ray of a foot kicking a soccer ball that I'd done for World Cup soccer a few years earlier, and he knew an artist from Belém. The artist from Belém went to high school with the radiologist that I'd written, a year earlier. Write the radiologist again, and get yes, right, and then no more answers. So I had a show coming up in Rio at a gallery there, and I had a Brazilian assistant who lived in Salvador, and we said, screw it, let's just show up and see what happens. So I went there on like no, I said, we're coming, but they never responded. He finally made contact with the radiologist. So he went a day earlier, and so I get there, and the guy shows up in this huge monster truck. Okay, he has a speedboat on the Amazon River, an airstrip on the Amazon, and this is the start of the story. So we get there, and the guy takes us all around this town, takes us to an incredible dinner. Like, all I want to do is go to the lab and see what's going on. And so after dinner, he goes, you want to see my lab? And I go, yeah, and it's 3 buildings of the most high-tech equipment you can ever imagine. He studied at Mass General. His Portuguese was about, my Portuguese was the level of his English. So we sort of like, figured it out. But in this place, he had a piano bar, a coffee shop, and an art collection. So, I mean, this was like, oh my God. So next thing, I got the radiologist, now we got to find the animals. So we go on a hunt every day. We're going to the fish market, which starts at 4 in the morning, ends at 7. It's the hottest place I've ever been. It pours at 4 o'clock every day, torrential downpour for 3 or 4 hours, this deep in the streets, the water. So water is a big part of this story. And one of the animals that we did, so we did piranhas, birds from an aviary, and as soon as everyone figured out, the people in Belém that had the aviary, the zoo and stuff, they didn't have access to x-ray equipment. And now I gave them access. So they were like super cooperative. At the aviary, the birds had broken bones, and they wanted to figure out if it was the food. And to get to the story of the surfboard, one of the things we did was x-ray a live alligator. And so these guys come in with the alligator one night. I had asked if I could get an alligator. It was kind of a dream. So they come in with this juvenile alligator. None of these animals were damaged. They were all handled by vets and things like that. So no animals were apparently tortured. But they bring in this live alligator, right? And alligators, apparently, this is what I've learned, but when they have like, this part is really strong, this part is very weak. So they only take a piece of twine, one piece of twine around this alligator's mouth. I'm like, hey, I don't know that they don't have this big muscle. I'm flipped out, but we take the alligator and we put it through in sections in the x-ray machine, and I put it together in Photoshop, and I have my alligator, and I'm thinking like, well, that idea that everybody can take these take an alligator, kill its stuff, and put it on your wall, right? That's sort of the trophy. And I was thinking, well, if I put this on a surfboard, I could do an eco trophy. And surfboards are everywhere in Brazil. They have 3,000 miles of coastline. And so I said, okay, this would be a really cool eco kind of object. Well, semi-eco because it's made of plastic, so the contradictions are inherent. But the idea was, artists get, the old model of art is you get a show every 2 years in a gallery, 100 people, 200 people come to the opening, and then nobody comes afterwards, and your audience is about 300 people. And I'm thinking, like, how do I increase the audience for this discussion? And could I make the idea of the environment hip and cool, and people would want these things, and you would get this conversation out into the culture beyond the context of the gallery. So that led me to do a lot of surfboards, fashion, and I do cashmere, as some of you know, and I've worked for a Brazilian company called Osklin designing clothing, and I bumped into this guy, and I'm gonna shut up because I think I'm going way over here. I bumped into the guy that ran the biggest clothing company at a party, and it started out, oh, what do you do? Oh, I just been to Belém. Oh, I just been to Belém. This is where I got all these animals. This is not an easy place to get to. And I go like, what do you do? And he goes like, well, I have a fashion. Oh, I thought he was an artist because he said he's looking for fabrics and things like that. And he is an artist, by the way. But I ended up saying, I got a great idea for you. And I pitched it. And in true Brazilian style, it took another 2 or 3 years to make it happen. But, you know, I started designing surfwear for this company called Osklin, and then making my own clothing, working with a cashmere company. So the surfboard upstairs is an x-ray of me in the Amazon swimming with an Amazon riverfish that was too big to put in the x-ray machine. So we did a full body scan MRI, and I did a self-portrait in the Amazon. So that's the origin of that. And thanks.
Yeah, I'm not sure where to go. I'm still kind of mesmerized. Yeah, I have a piece up in the bell tower that's kind of hidden in the darkness up there. But it basically has a laser line that it projects around a small room. That's the library, and then the sort of speed of that laser line moving up and down, and then the distance that it moves up and down is based on the like NOAA wave buoy that's off of Montauk. So when we were talking before, then Scott revealed that he monitors this buoy every morning because it's the one that all the surfers look to kind of figure out what the conditions might be like. So I think for this instance of the show, then there's a little computer up there, and then that goes out and checks the website automatically, and then that information is kind of scaled through some code, and then it kind of recreates the kind of conditions of the ocean in a general way. So the idea behind the piece for me is just this ability to have it change over the time of the show, and that when the weather is different out there, that the piece behaves differently. And I think I'm interested in technology as a way to try to experience and understand places. Like sometimes that place can be the place where you are, and sometimes that place can be a distant place. And I've been working on versions of this piece. Like artists kind of do the same thing over and over again sometimes. But I've been working on versions of this piece for about 6 years, and then the earlier versions, I would put the instrument in the ocean and try to have a show timed with the proper functioning of the instrument in the ocean, and then have this connection between the two places. And then this is the first time that I've used a kind of public resource, which is the buoy that's actually out there. But I think that the reason that the first instance of this piece was really about this idea of using technology to go to a place that I couldn't go to. So I know that we can go to the ocean. And I grew up in Seattle, and I lived out here for 3 years, and I feel like I'm a coastal person, but I'm not an ocean person. And I was learning this. I was kind of learning how to code and learning how to do electronics and learning about sensors. And I think that I was just attracted to this idea of having access to a place that I just couldn't physically be at, or I couldn't physically experience on a regular basis. So I think the first instance of the piece was really more, it was almost like my version of sending a satellite out to space or something, or just this idea of trying to do something where you're putting something out there to understand these things that I guess for me are almost more about story, or more about things that I've read about, or voyages that other people have had. So I think that that's the, I will keep it at that for now.
One of the things I find interesting in all three of your works is that there is a balance between what you actually make with your hands, the physical object, and the ideas that are behind them, which are vast and very varied. So perhaps could you talk for a moment about, this kind of conversation in your heads about what the object will look like, what the object will be, and how you're actually going to address or expand upon the ideas that are driving you.
For me, I think often the medium is part of the message, if not the full message. I work with a lot of different materials, not just traditional paper, canvas, other supports. But for me, found object is really interesting and important because the objects have stories behind them. So the work in the show is they're pieces of boats. They're fiberglass kind of fragments coming from fishing industry or just pleasure craft or what have you. But I find all sorts of things. It's not always just a support that actually does work very well for a drawing medium, which is really cool. But I also collect just the minuscule pieces of plastic and all sorts of things that I can't even identify that I've been collecting for years, and I still not, something might be completely changed by the force of the ocean. I'm not sure. It becomes unrecognizable. I think that's really interesting and beautiful too. So I'm always thinking about a material and how I can use it in a non-traditional way or a different way. I'm working with seaweed now. Kelp, which is this amazing, it's a seaweed, it's a native seaweed that grows off of Montauk where I collect it. And not only do I eat it, but I'm making sculptures out of it. And lights, I made lighting fixtures. And it's also this thing that it can actually help be very beneficial for the environment. It actually can soak up nitrogen and CO2. And they're looking at this as a serious climate solution, which I think is fascinating. And beyond those things, there are things I find on the beach, driftwood and things that immediately say this is from the ocean or thereabouts. Like for me, it's the coastal environment as well. And I like to tell stories with those objects, not only through drawing and painting, but kind of how that relates to each object or how I can work on that object, and that becomes more intrinsic to an idea.
Okay, I want to make sure. Is the question the final object? How do you know what it's going to be? Or
No, the question is really about the fact that all three of you are committed artists making objects, and you also have a number of ideas that drive you. And so I'm interested in this interplay of the kind of physicality of the works of art that you produce and the ideas that you have that drive them.
Okay, I think I understand that. With surfboards, the shape is based on the object that I put on the surfboard. So, you're trying to figure out how to marry, in my case, a message with an object. And when I make paintings, I don't know. I have less an idea what the outcome is going to be. When I make sculptures, it's basically an X-ray on a sheet of glass and a piece of bronze that sits outside. So it's pretty predictable. It's more, for me, it's more like, what are the different ways that the content can be distributed? I'm kind of interested in content distribution. And I know what the distribution network is in the art world, and it's very limited, but this whole place is about this really interesting idea about what is content, community, and culture, and that's an issue that's really important to me in my work. And obviously, with the content is what are the important issues of the day, and how do you get it out there in different ways? And the surfboard was just a really hip way. The most recent, I've made about 80 of them, and the most recent one is the Andromeda Galaxy that happens to be like the shape of a surfboard if you put it at the right angle. So I put those on the most recent board. So it's sort of like, wow, I've got this shape. It can work a certain kind of way. When you have a painting, it's a rectangle, and I've been recently I took thousands of photos in the favela. It's a whole other story I won't get into, but getting in and out of there alive is part of it. But using that as the content of that work is about the expressive nature of the need for energy, right? So they go into the favela. Well, the people in the favela, there's no cops. It's run by drug dealers. And the wires are everywhere. You've seen these photos like crazy. They look like what I saw was Jackson Pollock, actually, because I come from the East End of Long Island, and I just thought, like, wow, this is human energy through their own need and the fact that there's no regulation, creating these collective drawings in space. So then it was like, okay, this is a really incredible idea, and how do I work with that? And that comes out, kind of in a painting practice. So I would say content-driven is the most interesting starting point. I think all of us have that same idea. There's the content, and then how does it distribute it, unload itself onto a surface or circulate within culture?
Yeah, I think that one of the joys and struggles of being an artist is that you get to define your own problems, and I feel like that I'm happiest as an artist when I'm trying to design or create something that will sort of, I guess, so half of my work is kind of making sensors that go out in the environment, and then half of my work is creating ways to visualize those things. And so each side has a function, but I really like this idea of picking something, like you kind of get to pick this problem of having this piece of technology live in a natural environment, or just a environment that it's not really at home in. And so I think that's kind of fun to be able to push up against this. Like last August, I got to design these little, I called them ice spiders, but I got to design these little things that got dropped off of drones on top of icebergs in Greenland. And so we went out with I spent 2 months kind of at my school and in my studio, like making these little things and then dropping them onto different surfaces of like foam and plywood and sort of seeing if they would stick. And then the idea was that we could place these things on the icebergs, and then the icebergs would kind of go on this journey. Like one of them went for about 1,000 kilometers over a few months after that. But I think that you get, like the idea part is sort of picking the problem or deciding how to apply your energy. And then I think the kind of artist part is the response, and that can be by hand or it can be by computer modeling in some cases, or working with code or working with technology. But it's all about kind of, I guess, having those two things sort of working for and against each other for me.
So I think the other part of that is the question of audience. And I think, Steve, your idea of content distribution is really interesting. Given the kind of activist bent of some of your work, I mean, obviously the idea of getting outside of a traditional art world is important, and I think all three of you do that in different ways. So, when do you, or what do you hope your audiences will take away from your work? We'll just go down the line.
Okay. I think, I create my work for my own enjoyment, and that's how I delve into my practice. But I really do hope that those who view it do get a message from it, which might include my value, my belief that all of this existence is connected intrinsically and through consciousness and through all these invisible threads, and how nature and ecology goes much deeper than just this surface level of, this idea that there's humans and then there's nature, like there's a nature outside. So I'm always thinking about that idea and then drawing that back to how do I tell a story, how do I create narrative around it, whether it could be through visual symbols or ideas or myth making or expressing something visually as that. And I am thinking more about how a language of art it changes through culture. We have all these surfaces now, and so surface idea is another thing I'm thinking about. Whether it's like I've created wallpaper designs, and which it's not just wallpaper, but it could be a surface for anything. And we use art in so many ornamental ways. If it's a design on your shirt or a peat pattern. Or now we're going into the cloud and thinking about how the digital realm is really changing us like completely, and our culture is just so now deeply embedded in the digital world, and I think how we relate to ourselves and the natural world that we're a part of is a huge it's a huge question that we're asking ourselves. So that's what I want, is if there is an audience that looks at my work, not only am I showing what I think is beautiful, but I think it's also asking you, what do you think is beautiful? How do you think about yourself? Yeah.
I'm going to repeat what Scott just said. You know, it's about we're connected. Every action has a result. And I was really fortunate. I got Carl Safina to write for the first book, and the next book is Neil deGrasse Tyson is writing. They both said something interesting. Carl Safina was talking about, you know, you throw a rock in a stream and it disturbs, you know, the flow of, it's never the same, it's always in motion, right? And we're always in motion. And Neil talked about the electrons moving through the wires, and his, you know, everything is we're all connected to a plug in a socket that's connected to an energy source. So there were these two ways through particle physics. That is something I'm doing now, and the newest thing, comparing particle physics to the favela in Brazil. But it's the idea that I would want to be a part of, which is what this is. You know, there's community. It doesn't work unless there's community. It doesn't work unless you have common values. It doesn't work, from my perspective, if there's you know, you're responsible for your actions. That's something that we're losing more and more in culture now. Like, there's this idea that I can, you know, people can do whatever they want. They're not responsible for their actions. We know how sensitive the environment is. And it's just, you know, all of us are looking at the environment. The environment is something that you want to be aware of all the time. You don't want to get so disconnected that you turn this into a ball of fire, which is, you know, which we're on the way to doing. But I'd like to think that somehow this idea of community could be much, much stronger and grow. And how can I participate in that process?
Yeah, I think I have two audiences that I think about, and I think that one audience is the gallery audience. So in that case, I'm interested in trying to get people to feel connected to things that are just a long way away, or that we know about conceptually, but that we don't really get to visit. Like, we don't get to go to the Arctic Ocean and stand on sea ice, or we don't get to see icebergs up close in our kind of daily lives. And so I think that for the gallery side, that my fantasy is that these things that I make allow people to be kind of connected to these places that are difficult to go or hard to experience, or that we all can't go experience. And then I think the other audience is, which I'm just kind of realizing this now, but is actually contributing to these scientific data sets. So I've been really lucky the last few years to be collaborating with scientists, and then the instruments that I make, that I put out there, are contributing to these climate and weather data sets. And I think that I could tell you that that's because I have this altruistic desire to like contribute to those things, but I think it's also just that I really like the idea of being on a team and being practical. And that like there's some scene, I can't remember the movie at this point, but there's some like end of the world Armageddon movie in which you get like the 8 best people on the plane, and they're gonna go like save the world, and there's like the civil engineer, and there's the astrophysicist, and there's all these things, but there's like never an architect or a designer on the plane. There's never an artist on the plane. And so I think that part of my work is that like I got on the plane but I'm using my sort of art and design skills. So I think that's it. I think it's interesting to have these, like I like that Scott said that his audience is in some ways himself, which I think is always true for an artist, but then we can have these other audiences that can be kind of varied.
I want to open it up for questions, but there's 2 things I want to do before that. I know that Sai has some questions for you too, but before Sai gets to ask you guys questions, I want to ask one last question, which is about the kind of duality of your work and the fact that you are touching on these essential ideas of scientists, of myth, you in some ways deal with a kind of dual language, a language of perhaps experts in other fields, and then the language of art. And is that something you think about a lot? And if so, is that something that you feel is really fertile in your work? Sorry. Steve,
I was first to the mic, okay.
Oh, it's going to ring in.
I like the question because I work a lot, all of us, I think, I work a lot with scientists. I've been really lucky to work with great scientists, a couple of Nobel Prize winners and, theoretical physicists. And the thing that I'm thinking now, we're not going to change human behavior. It's just, not going to happen. And there's no time to change human behavior. So where's the solution going to come from? And there's this there is a thread of culture right now that has this incredible disdain for science and facts. And my fantasy is that, well, first of all, make science accessible. Like, how do you make these complex ideas, especially, particle physics, which is based on uncertainty and probability, right? That's not Newtonian. So that's a very weird area to get into. But if we're going to come up with any solutions, it's going to come through science. So I feel like we really got to make science accessible, make people look at it, try to understand it better, at least be curious about it, and know that. I don't know what the solution's going to be. Is it going to be carbon sinks? Is it going to be kelp fields? Is it going to be, shields that we put, there's all sorts. Is it going to be fusion? I mean, but it's not. It's going to come through science. It's not going to become because humans are going to change their behavior. So I think the language of science is a really important language. And then finally, visual culture, there's a new digital language, and art is always made of the language of its time, and science technology is the language of our time. So if you want to contextualize where your work sits, it's always in that language system. So Renaissance is, 1-point perspective, Giotto, 2-point, it gets more complex, and we have a new kind of language, and I think science is, merging that with visual traditional culture is, that language question, if that's what you're asking.
I'll jump in there. I think my advisor, when I was doing my MFA, mentioned that in order for a collaboration to be successful, that both sides have to get something out of it. And so I think that I'm really shit at most languages, but I work hard to be conversant. and so I think that it's just important that you have to be able to have a conversation with the people that you're working with. And so I feel like it's not exactly an answer to your question, but I feel like that in order, if I'm working with scientists, then I feel like I'm representing artists, and I want to be a contributor to the situation, and I'm not comfortable with situations where it's like the scientist does the work and then the artist just does the visualization. Yeah, like I feel like we're better than that. Like we have more to offer than just sort of like taking this thing that somebody else thought of and making it pretty. And I guess the other thing is that I kind of think that scientists and artists are after the same thing. Like they're both kind of introvert people that care a ton about something nobody else really cares about, and you like spend your life obsessing over some like small minutia. But I do feel like that there is like designers and engineers are kind of like one pair, but then I feel like scientists and artists are actually kind of a similar pair.
Well, I would agree with a lot of those things. I really like the idea of cross-pollination in art versus science, because they are not completely opposed to each other, but in many ways they act like they are. So I think artists have a lot to teach scientists, and scientists have a lot to teach artists, and they can both influence each other, and I really like that idea. I'm headed in a couple of weeks up to Maine to the Isles of Shoals in a marine laboratory, which is my second time there doing a residency, and I'm going to be working with marine scientists and kids in the Cornell and University of New Hampshire, and they do a summer session, and I'm going to be teaching workshops, but also part of it is going to be working with some of the field researchers, and I had an idea where I want to explore ideas of old scientific thinking and new scientific thinking, or new kind of frontiers in science. So that's, and I don't think of myself necessarily, again, as just like the illustrator putting pen to paper to trying to get these scientists to humanize their thought, but I do think of it as an opportunity for, again, artists and scientists to help each other get to some greater than the sum of those two parts ideas. And I think that's really important for the larger world and for all sorts of audiences, because if you study one or you study the other, maybe you just get stuck in those compartments. And I think most people need to see more holistically. And that's how I think people can become better humans, is to integrate all of these things together.
There's a great French quote, and I can't remember who said it, but the idea is, beyond work, there's only inspiration. That no matter how hard you work, there is going to be this point where inspiration will take you further. And that is perhaps a place where, for both artists and scientists, there is a place you can meet and discuss. Maybe not. Steve's giving me a funny look.
Well, no, I went to CERN. I was lucky enough to get invited. I manipulated the invitation, obviously, because they weren't saying, "Oh, we're going to invite Steve Miller to CERN." It wasn't on their radar. But what happened there was that I had lunch every day with the leading theoretical physicists of the world. I mean, if you were a physics student, you would die to be in my position. I didn't earn it or deserve it, but anyway, I got there. And talking to these guys, every day was like the 4th of July in my brain. It was just like fireworks 24/7. I've never been more stimulated or more happy in my entire life. And they are able to communicate, complex ideas simply. And so I'm sitting there, well, there's two moments. One was, I asked them to explain what the Higgs boson was and what they were trying to do. And the Higgs boson is a particle that kind of completed something called the Standard Model, which includes most of the known particles in the universe. So the guy's going, well, pretend the universe is a field of packed snow, and you're cross-country skiing across the field, and you're not interacting it, so you're a photon, right? You have no mass, and you're skating across the surface of the field. He said, take your skis off and put on snowshoes. Now you're sinking into the field, so you have more mass in relationship to the field, but your mass is decided by your interaction with the field. So take your snowshoes off, and now you're sinking deep into the field. You're up to your knees in the snow, and you have more mass in relationship to the field. You still weigh the same. You just have more mass. So he said, what we're trying to do is take a stick of dynamite, throw it into the snow field, and see if we can see what a snowflake looks like. And that was sort of like a way to visualize this Higgs boson thing. So I'm going like, okay, so dark, so we know the universe is expanding, and what we're doing at CERN, or what they're doing at CERN, is 5% of the visible universe is what they're exploring. And I go like, okay, so what's the rest of it? And they go, dark matter and dark energy. And I go like, what's that? And in unison, they said, three of them, like the Three Stooges, they said, we don't know.
That's a great point to, I know Sai had some questions, and I'm sure perhaps you two have questions for each other too. So Sai, why don't you kick off the artist on artist moment?
Sure, I will go to Scott. And I guess I just wanted to hear about geometry or math. When I look at your work, then I feel like, I think it's because it's heavily influenced by nature, but I feel like that there's like a very kind of peaceful geometric presence in a lot of it, and this kind of like careful balancing of things. And so I was just curious, like, if that's at all conscious for you, or if that comes from someplace.
Maybe. I don't know if it's that overt, but yeah, maybe. I think that could just be the natural way I put together pictures, or I'm very attracted to balance and symmetry, asymmetry, and sacred geometry, which I think is fascinating. I don't overtly put that into the work.
It almost feels radical or anti-contemporary to me.
Yeah, it could be. I mean, I grew up, in the birthplace of abstract expressionism, so a lot of my work is almost a complete antithesis of a lot of it. Not all of it. I love a lot of the ideas, but it's yes, I'm definitely more of a formalist and trying to take elements of those different things and put it to my own use.
Sorry, Steve. I guess my question for you is, what is the role of truth in art? Like you use technology, and when people use technology when humans see technology that they're not familiar with, so like for me, that is the X-ray. Like I don't really know how it works. I mean, I kind of do, but I haven't spent a lot of time with it. And so I think that there's this idea that you're revealing something, but you're also storytelling with the technology. So I guess I'm just kind of curious, like, is there like, are you showing a truth with your work? Or how do you think about like that kind of
I can
role?
handle the math question better. You know, in CERN, there are these like well, first of all, this is geometry in motion, right? Yeah. You know, when you look at a python, you know, and you know, it looks like a slinky, and when you see the X-ray, you go like, wow, this is a kind of mathematics that's in nature. You know, initially, when science was looking at scientists like a couple hundred years ago, they put everything together by how it looked, right? All the circles went together, all the spirals went together, all the leaves of a certain shape went together, and that's kind of how they did it. And in CERN, they have these chalkboards that are just like crazy, right? And that's kind of the subject matter of the next book I'm working on. And then there's an essay about mathematics and the aesthetics of science and the beauty of math. And there was this Richard Feynman equation, and the equation was proving a principle, and other science looked at it, and they said, no, it doesn't work out. They went and they had other scientists, you know, look at the equation and see if it was true. And you know, in the end, the equation was true, to get to the word truth. And Feynman said, yes, because the equation was beautiful. So, truth and beauty.
Now you're talking about Scott's work.
Thank you.
Any other questions on this side of the divide? I'd love to open it up to questions from the audience.
I've thought about it a lot over the years, that artists and scientists working together. And I've always felt like artists got a lot more out of it than scientists did. And I also felt like artists were always more were self-absorbed or after their own issues or their own problems that they, you know, want to solve. Can any of you or all of you talk about that relationship and how scientists, what might they be getting out of that relationship?
I can definitely talk about this. I can't answer the question, but I can talk about it. So, you know, scientists, especially a lot of the people that I work with, nobody's interested in what they're doing, right? They can't believe, you know, there's no magazine that's putting out in popular culture. They're working in these obscure, you know, cubby holes, and they're just amazed that anybody's interested in what they're doing. So, you know, on the most simple level possible, they're getting attention that they don't get. And then they find out that someone's interested, and then, in my case, not with it's CERN, because that's a whole other thing, but other scientists I've worked with, I go, could I just play with the equipment and do whatever I want? They don't get to do that because they're always, first of all, it's a luxury, and I'm coming in as like the class clown and getting to be playful with the equipment, right? So, like, especially with some of the X-ray stuff. They kind of, you know, like when I took the python to the hospital, they were flipped out. We had to sneak them in a suitcase, and it's like we were visiting grandma, and the radiologist went nuts. They loved this. I didn't touch the snake. I don't actually like snakes. And they were like playing with the snake. It was crawling all over it. So they had a good snake day, I got some x-rays, and then everybody got a snake print, right? Everybody that I work with always gets the art that I give them. So I guess in my case, I entertain them and give them free art. So I wish I could say I could do more than that.
Wait, just a second, Scott or Sai, what do artists get out of your collaborations?
What did the scientists get?
Sorry,
Yeah.
scientists.
So I'm going to go back to that idea of the cross-pollination, where a lot of these people, they live in kind of this, the left brain logic world of academia. And I mean, there's nothing wrong with that, of course, but it's very limited in a certain way if you're only dealing with logic and you only see the universe in terms of equations that need to make sense, and everything needs to like square with one another. And I think artists can help some. I think academic or scientists, people in that world kind of break through boxes and barriers. And I think the best scientists are artists, right? Because they look at a problem in a really creative way. And I think that's true again across all fields. You know, you can have a baker who's an artist, or a janitor who's an artist, and because if they can look at the world creatively, then they're gonna have as much fun as I think anyone who calls themselves a full-time artist is. So yeah, what are they getting out of it? I hope that I think the horizons are expanded, but that goes both ways. So everything that I like to put out there, I get that back from the science and from just something that I don't understand in a certain way that I can only get far enough with what I work with. It's just both ways. It's understanding on both sides.
Yeah, I think there's a fantasy that the artist is going to provide this outside perspective that is going to kind of enable the scientist to see something differently, or like understand the problem a little bit differently. I don't know that really happens, or that's that has happened, but I do think, I think from kind of maybe it's more like a psychoanalytical side, but I feel like the artists always think of themselves as non-technical, and then the scientists think of themselves as non-aesthetic or non-visual. And I do think that neither is true. And I think that having those conversations, or having them work together, can be beneficial. I don't know, like the scientists that I work with, I'm always blown away by their PowerPoints, because I'm just like, PowerPoint is such a shit tool that I would never spend that much time like making something really amazing in there. But then they get in there and they just make really amazing PowerPoints. And but it's just like they have these there's gonna almost, it's like scientists are working in a craft tradition where there's like these really hard rules about what you like what you can do and what you can't do. But I think that yeah, I mean, I guess I have a boring answer for you, which is just that I contribute data to what they're doing, and I make tools that are almost as good as what they're using, but they're a lot cheaper, so we can make more of them, or I can make custom tools for them. But I don't think that answer's that interesting. Like, I think that the conceptual answer is more interesting, or this idea of exchange. So
I also think, I mean, if we think about, two really powerful recent examples of artists working with scientists. I mean, if we think about James Turrell, what he's doing at, the Curator, working with an astrophysicist, or if we think about Josiah McElhaney, who for his chandeliers has also worked with, just these unbelievably interesting and exceptional astrophysicists. There is perhaps a way that conversation allows for a visualization that they can't do by themselves, which I think is one reason that both of those artists have been so successful in the collaborations they have had with those particular types of scientists. But we'd have to have them there to answer that question. I'm just throwing them under the bus.
This is obviously a good question you brought up, because I'm not letting it go yet. Wait a minute. Through what I'm going to say, I'm actually wondering if you could dig a little bit and see if this has happened to you, and maybe, or has it happened with other people that you've been involved with. I've collaborated with a lot of scientists from around the world. Actually, Frank Molina, who was the head of CERN, who started this project of having artists from all over the world, well, 2 from America, collaborate with other media scientists from Europe, and then create interactive projects together. Well, what was mind-blowing to me was I worked with these fabulous, really fascinating people on 2 different teams. One was an interactive movie called The Third Woman, based on the Third Man movie. The other one was on this relative perspectives of religious texts called, at the time it was called Crossings. And the amazing thing was in each situation, we totally switched roles. I don't know how to program. I'm a flying, wild card, I don't have that linear ability to actually write algorithms, but I sure know how to experience them. And we all switch roles. I came up with how we could, I remembered reading something about this scientist, Johnny Lee, who had once said, you can create interactive projects easily from hacking the Wiimote, which was the cheapest, easiest way to do it. And guess what? That's what we did, and it worked beautifully. Me, come up with that? That was insane. Another person came up with such beautiful visuals that were, this person is a scientist, a media scientist, and oh my God, he came up with fabulous things. And another one on another team, she came up with the most, she was a filmmaker, and she came up with the most fabulous static images that actually set off everybody's, on that particular team, all of their neurons were flying. It was interesting. Everybody just switched roles, and I thought that was fascinating. Has it ever happened in any of your teams, or has anybody ever talked about that with other teams? Because I know you've been involved with different scientists.
Not yet for me. That would be fun. If I started writing code or coming up with writing papers, yeah, I'm ready for that, I guess. Another opportunity. I don't have the training. That might be the difference.
Well, yeah, I mean, you don't lose yourself. It's who you are, but you somehow, I don't know, fantasies, whatever. You, Steve, anything?
Yeah, I can't say that I have switched roles in any of these. My experience is that the scientific language is so specific and complex, and it takes so much knowledge. It's like learning any language. Learn Russian, learn Portuguese, learn French. It takes a long time to put together a sentence when you're coming at it from the outside. So I'm only able to come at it from when I went to CERN, I read every book on physics I could possibly absorb. I didn't want to go in there as a complete idiot, but so maybe more than the layman, I know more than the normal person. But I mean, you get in this world, it's so mysterious, Byzantine, philosophical, deeply complex that I can only come at it with my perspective, and I don't think I offer them much, but they still talk to me. I don't know why.
Because they're getting a lot out of you, I'm sure. And you, any?
Yeah, I guess I'm a weird case because I make sensors, or I do make electronic circuits and piece together code to do things. But I think that the one thing that is specific about that is that I work in environmental science, and my personal theory is that because you can't make a lot of money at environmental science, like you can't blow people up or get oil or do anything like send people to space, then the environmental science tools are still very basic. And so like I have some specific expertise into where I can like it kind of has continued to surprise me over the last 5 or 6 years that I've been focused on this, that I keep thinking I'm going to come to a situation where my tool set is going to be useless, but it's never been the case. But I'm not going to CERN and saying like, oh, did you guys think about like tweaking this thing? But I'm hanging out with like geologists and oceanographers and atmospheric scientists, where they're so it's just kind of like a niche case that I enjoy. So yeah, I mean, I think that the tools, but I'm a weird artist because the tools that I use are the same tools that scientists use. It's just that I'm interested in embodied experience or visualization as opposed to like publishing papers or finding the math behind it. So
Perhaps we have time for just one more question.
or two.
This is directed to Steve. There's a poet's line that is, goes something like, Euclid alone looked on Beauty Bare. I think it might be from Poe, but I certainly think you should make a T-shirt of that. And one thing I wanted to say is that I am really right-brained, so I think my head should be resting on my right shoulder. That's how heavy my brain is. And so I just want to say that you all piqued my interest tonight, and I'll probably listen to Science Friday, is it? And I really enjoyed your talk.
Thank you.
Thank you.